Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. If you're new here, please make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that will touch your heart and stir your soul. Before everything fell apart, my life felt like a dream I had worked years to build. My name is Clarissa, and I have been married to Oliver for 3 beautiful years. We met in the most unexpected way on a rainy evening in a small cafe, where I ducked in to escape a downpour, and he'd offered me his table because the place was packed. That simple act of kindness turned into hours of conversation, which turned into weeks of seeing each other, and eventually, into a marriage that everyone in our lives envied. Oliver was the kind of man who could light up a room just by walking into it. He had this calm confidence, and when he smiled at me, it felt like the rest of the world disappeared. When Oliver got an exciting job offer in Singapore, it felt like the next chapter in our adventure together. He'd been working in logistics, and this position promised not just a higher salary but also incredible career growth. At first, the idea of living apart was tough. We had promised each other we'd never do long distance, but we agreed it would only be for a year. We planned for me to visit him every few months, and we'd use the extra income to finally buy the little craftsman-style house we'd been dreaming about in Portland. The first few months were manageable. We called every day, sometimes twice, and sent each other little videos, him showing me the busy streets of Singapore, and me sending him clips of the Portland rain, which he said he missed. He had this habit of ending every call with, "One day closer, Clarissa," and it made me believe the time apart would pass quickly. Then one morning, I got a call that would rip my world in half. It was Oliver's colleague, his voice trembling as he said, "Clarissa. I'm so sorry." Oliver collapsed at the office. "They think it's a brain aneurysm. He's at the hospital." My ears rang, and my hands went numb. I remember whispering, No, that's not possible," as if saying it would undo what was happening. I booked the first flight I could find, barely able to see the keys on my phone through the tears. By the time I landed in Singapore, Oliver was gone. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and despair, and the fluorescent lights made everything feel harsher. A doctor with tired eyes explained that the aneurysm had ruptured, and there was nothing they could do. I don't remember much after that except holding Oliver's wedding ring in my hand, its warmth fading, as if it knew he wasn't coming back. What followed was a blur of paperwork, meetings with embassy officials, and conversations with funeral directors. I had to make decisions I never thought I'd face in my early 30s, whether to cremate him there or bring him back home. I decided to bury him in Singapore. It felt right, it was where his last chapter had been written, and I wanted a place I could return to when I was ready. I called my family from the small hotel room I was staying in, my voice shaking as I told them what had happened. My mother's response was practical, almost cold. "That's terrible, Clarissa, but you need to make sure the death certificate is correct for the insurance." My younger brother, Mason, didn't even answer my call the first time I later found out he was at a friend's barbecue. Not once did anyone ask if I needed them to come. Oliver's colleagues were the ones who stood by me. A woman named Priya brought me hot tea and sat with me in silence for hours. A man named Daniel helped me navigate the hospital's confusing billing system. Strangers were holding me up while my own family was an ocean away, too busy or unwilling to be there. The funeral was small but beautiful. Oliver's co-workers shared stories about how he always brought homemade snacks for the office, and how he stayed late to help others finish projects. I stood there, holding back sobs, feeling like my heart was a fragile glass about to shatter. When I placed a single white rose on his coffin, I whispered, "One day closer, Oliver," because I wanted to believe there was a place beyond this life where we'd meet again. After a week of sleepless nights and endless formalities, I finally booked my return flight to Portland. It was a 30-hour journey with 2 layovers, and by the time I landed, I was beyond exhausted, my eyes gritty, my body aching, my soul drained. As the plane taxied to the gate, I opened the family group chat and typed, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" I watched the typing dots blink for a moment before Mason replied, "Sorry, I've got plans with friends tonight. Can you take an Uber?" It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I thought maybe my mother or my older sister, Evelyn, would step in, but instead, Evelyn sent a message, "I've got a PTA meeting. You'll be fine, right?" No one asked how I was feeling after losing my husband. No one acknowledged the 30-hour journey I had just endured. I walked out of the terminal into the chilly Portland air, dragging my suitcase behind me. My coat was too thin, and I could feel the damp cold settling into my bones. I booked a rideshare, and as I sat in the back seat staring out at the familiar streets, I couldn't help but feel like I was returning to a place that no longer felt like home. When we pulled up to my house, the first thing I noticed was how dark it looked. The driver offered to wait until I got inside, but I waved him off, wanting to believe I could handle it. Inside, the temperature was freezing colder than outside. I quickly realized the heating system wasn't working. The air smelled faintly of mold, and when I went into the kitchen, I saw water pooling on the floor. I followed the sound to the basement and found a burst pipe spraying icy water across the room. I stood there, water soaking my shoes, staring at the mess and wondering how it was possible that I could feel even more abandoned than I had in Singapore. My phone buzzed with another message from Mason, "Hope you got home okay. I'll call you tomorrow." I didn't reply. I didn't have the energy to. At that moment, I understood something that would shape the days ahead. Sometimes, the people you expect to catch you when you fall will be the ones who watch you hit the ground. And when that happens, you either stay there or you find the strength to get back up yourself. I didn't sleep that night. The cold seeped into every corner of the house, and the damp smell from the basement crept upstairs until it felt like it was clinging to my skin. I sat curled up on the couch with 2 blankets wrapped around me, listening to the distant hiss of water still leaking below. I had no strength to deal with it, no energy to call a plumber at midnight. My mind kept looping back to Singapore, to Oliver's warm laugh, the way his hand always found mine in a crowd, the sound of him saying, "One day closer, Clarissa." The silence here was unbearable. By morning, the water in the basement had risen enough to cover the first 2 steps of the staircase. I called my mother, hoping maybe just maybe she'd sense the desperation in my voice and offer to help. She answered with a casual, "Morning, Clarissa. What's up?" When I explained the situation, her tone stayed detached. "Well, that's unfortunate, but you've always been good at handling things on your own. I'm sure you'll figure it out." Not once did she offer to come over or even send someone. Mason called later, his voice cheerful. "Hey, sorry about yesterday. How's the house?" I told him about the flooding, the cold, the fact that I hadn't had a proper meal since I landed. He chuckled lightly. "Wow, rough welcome home. Anyway, I've got a game tonight, but I'll swing by in a few days if I can." A few days. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I didn't either. I just ended the call and stared at the wall. By the afternoon, I realized I couldn't ignore the basement any longer. I put on my thickest sweater, old jeans, and a pair of rain boots before heading down to see if I could stop the leak. The moment I stepped into the freezing water, my body tensed. I tried to navigate toward the main valve, my breath visible in the frigid air. Just as I reached for it, something unseen brushed my ankle. I startled, losing my balance, and my hand slipped against a wet electrical panel on the wall. The shock jolted through me like lightning, knocking the air from my lungs. My vision went white for a split second, and I stumbled backward into the icy water. The cold consumed me, seeping past every layer of clothing, biting into my skin until it felt like needles. My limbs grew heavy, sluggish. I tried to get up, but the dizziness made it impossible to steady myself. The last thing I remember before everything went black was hearing a faint voice shouting my name. When I came to, I was lying on a couch I didn't recognize, wrapped in thick blankets. A woman I'd only seen passing my neighbor, Diane, was kneeling beside me, pressing a warm mug of tea into my hands. "You scared me half to death, Clarissa," she said, her eyes wide with concern. "I saw water pouring out from under your garage door and came to check. Found you unconscious in the basement. You're lucky I called the paramedics when I did." Her words didn't fully register until I saw two men in uniforms packing up their equipment near the front door. One of them gave me a reassuring nod. Mild hypothermia and a minor electrical shock. You're going to be okay, but you need to stay warm and rest. As soon as they left, Diane insisted I spend the night at her place. That house isn't safe right now, she said firmly. I didn't have the strength to argue, so I followed her across the street, feeling an unfamiliar mix of gratitude and shame. Gratitude for her kindness, shame that it wasn't my own family offering it. Word about what happened spread quickly. By the next morning, a local news crew was parked outside Diane's house. I sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in a borrowed sweater, as a young reporter asked if I'd be willing to share my story. People need to hear about the dangers of cold homes and faulty wiring, she said, but also, your resilience. You just lost your husband, and now this. I agreed, though part of me worried how my family would react. The interview aired that evening, showing the flooded basement, the burst pipe, and me talking softly about coming home to an empty house after 30 hours of travel. I didn't name my family, but the implication was there. I had no one to help me except strangers. It didn't take long for my phone to explode with messages. My sister Evelyn was first. Why would you make us look bad on TV? Then my mother, you could have told them you didn't have friends in Portland, not family. And Mason, ever the charmer, this is why people think you're dramatic. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I didn't respond to any of them. Something inside me had shifted. I realized I'd been waiting hoping for them to suddenly become the people I needed. But they weren't going to. The only people showing up for me were my neighbors, the ones who brought over hot meals, lent me space heaters, and checked in every day until the repairs were done. Over the next week, I moved back into my house, now dry and warm again thanks to donations and volunteers from the community. Diane had organized a small fundraiser to help cover the repair costs, and I was overwhelmed by how many people contributed, some I barely knew, others complete strangers. They didn't owe me anything, but they cared. Meanwhile, my family's calls grew less frequent. When they did call, it was usually to defend themselves. We had things going on, Clarissa, my mother said one afternoon. Life doesn't stop just because you're going through something. I bit my tongue to keep from saying what I wanted to say, that maybe life didn't stop, but love should make you pause. One day, while I was at the local hardware store buying new shelving for the basement, a woman approached me hesitantly. You're the lady from the news, right? She asked. When I nodded, she smiled. I just wanted to say you made me call my sister. We hadn't spoken in years. Your story, it reminded me not to take people for granted. Her words stayed with me long after I left the store. Maybe my family had failed me, but my experience was touching lives I didn't even know. That night, as I sat in my repaired kitchen sipping tea, I realized I was starting to feel something I hadn't in weeks, hope. Not for my family to change, but for my own strength to grow. Still, part of me couldn't ignore the fact that my family's neglect was now public knowledge. They hated that people in the community were whispering about them, and I could sense their embarrassment simmering just under the surface. I didn't plan on revenge, not the loud, vengeful kind, but I also wasn't going to protect them from the consequences of their actions. What I didn't know then was that this quiet resolve would be the very thing that set the stage for the reckoning to come. The days that followed felt strangely still, as though the chaos had paused just long enough for me to catch my breath. My house was warm again, the repairs mostly finished, but something inside me had changed forever. I no longer waited for texts or calls from my family. If they reached out, fine. If they didn't, also fine. That deep ache for their approval had been replaced by something far steadier: boundaries. The local news story didn't fade as quickly as they'd hoped. People kept talking about it at the farmer's market, at the coffee shop, even at the grocery store when I went to pick up milk. You're so brave, some would say. You didn't deserve that kind of treatment, others would add quietly, glancing around as if my family might appear from behind the shelves. At first, my family tried to ignore the whispers, but soon the humiliation started to eat at them. Mason called me one evening, his voice sharp. "Look, Clarissa, we need to do some damage control. People are acting like we abandoned you on purpose." I took a slow breath before answering. "You did abandon me, Mason. And now people know." I didn't make up the truth. There was a pause, then the sound of him exhaling hard before he hung up. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth was doing the work for me. My revenge was quiet but powerful. Every awkward encounter they had at church, every neighbor's sidelong glance, every polite but firm conversation from people they respected, it was all a mirror showing them exactly who they had been when I needed them most. But while they were scrambling to repair their image, I was busy building something new. Diane and I grew close enough that she started calling me Han when she stopped by with fresh bread or invited me over for dinner. Through her, I met others in the neighborhood who had also faced sudden loss or family abandonment. We began meeting every other week at a small cafe downtown, sharing stories and pooling ideas for how we could help others in crisis. One evening, as I was telling the group about Oliver's dreams of helping young people travel and study abroad, someone said, "Why don't you start something in his name?" The idea lodged in my mind and refused to leave. That week, I drafted the beginnings of what would become the Oliver Grant Memorial Scholarship, a fund to help students studying abroad with emergency support systems in place, so no one would have to feel as lost and alone as I had in Singapore. Launching it wasn't easy, but the community rallied behind me. Local businesses donated, schools shared the scholarship information, and volunteers offered their time. It became my anchor, something that gave meaning to the grief that had once threatened to drown me. And with every application we approved, I felt like I was keeping a small part of Oliver's generous spirit alive. The irony was, my family didn't even ask about it. They saw the announcements online, of course, but they stayed silent. Maybe it was guilt, maybe pride, or maybe they still didn't care. But I no longer craved their acknowledgement. My validation came from the faces of the students who now had a safety net because of Oliver's legacy. A year after his death, I booked a flight back to Singapore. This time, I told no one in my family. The trip wasn't for them. I packed a small bouquet of white roses, just like the one I had placed on his coffin. The journey felt different now, still long, still tiring, but no longer crushing. When I stood before his grave, the air heavy with the scent of frangipani flowers, I spoke softly. "Oliver, I kept my promise. I found a way forward. And I built a place where others can find safety when life falls apart. You're still here, in every kindness they'll feel." I placed the roses down and let the silence hold me. That moment didn't erase the pain, but it reframed it. I understand now that family isn't always about shared bloodlines, it's about shared hearts. Mine was beating stronger than it had in months, carried by a network of people who had chosen to show up for me without obligation. When I returned to Portland, I knew the whispers about my family hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown louder. My story has been shared online, reaching far beyond our neighborhood. Messages poured in from strangers thanking me for speaking out, saying it had made them set boundaries, leave toxic situations, or simply ask for help when they needed it. It was then I realized that my quiet revenge had transformed into something much bigger. The public shame my family felt was just a side effect. The real victory was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my voice and using them to create change. I no longer feared running into them in public. When I did, I was polite but distant, answering their small talk with measured words and a smile that didn't invite closeness. They were living with the consequences of their choices, and I was living in the freedom of mine. Some nights, I still missed the life I thought I'd have with Oliver. I missed the sound of his laugh, the way he'd steal the last cookie, the quiet reassurance of his presence beside me. But I had found a way to carry him forward not in grief, but in action. That was the truest form of love I could give him now. And maybe, in the end, that was the sweetest form of revenge, not just surviving without the people who failed me, but thriving in spite of them. Moral lesson. Life has a way of revealing who truly stands with you when the storms come. Sometimes, the people you expect to be your shelter will leave you standing in the rain. And when that happens, you have two choices. To stay cold and bitter, or to build your own warmth from the hands of those who choose to care. We often believe family is an unshakable safety net, but love without action is just a word. The real family we keep is made of people who show up, who listen, who act not because they have to, but because they want to. When pain breaks you open, let it be the space where compassion grows. Turn your loss into a bridge for someone else's survival. That's how we honor those we've lost and protect those who are still here. So, if you're listening to this and feeling abandoned, remember your worth isn't measured by who fails you, but by what you choose to rise and build from it. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with friends, subscribe to the channel, and tell